What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today, Nick and I are going to be ranking our top 5 wide receivers in the 2025 NFL Draft. I have a feeling that this was going to be a pretty long video, man. Just going to go ahead and put that out there, which is really per the course for like when we get together and start talking ball. But as always, our goal is to really provide the most like in-depth depiction of these players we can possibly give. And we really enjoy like getting into the weeds about these prospects. I'm really grateful to have a lot of you sickos out there that value this type of content, willing to hang out with us for, an hour, probably more on this one to talk about a handful of these guys. But, first things first, Nick, we've been wanting to do this for a while, man, but how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. We're towards that time of the year where March Madness is in full swing. We're about to enter April. We're about to enter like the finalization parts of the draft process and getting towards that part of the year. So I'm really excited, and I mean, I'm excited to talk about these receivers, but for completely different reasons.
Yeah.
and I'm just interested to get my thoughts out about this class.
Yeah, really polarizing group. I feel like the opinions on this group as a whole are kind of wide ranging. But like you said, we're just over like 3 weeks away from draft weekend. Time is really flying by. So just a quick reminder for everybody: please make sure that you like, subscribe, drop us a comment to kind of help us out with the algorithm. If you enjoy this type of content, it does help the channel continue to grow. We sincerely appreciate it. Just before we start endlessly ranting about these guys, I wanted to kind of ask your impression on this class as a whole. It's been something that's came up on social media a lot, just in terms of, the top end talent, the depth of it, how it compares to previous classes in some form or fashion. I ended up watching at least 3 games of over 20 guys in this class. My top 15 rankings will release on SteelersNow.com sometime tomorrow or Wednesday. If I remember, I'll try to come back and link it to this video for those of you guys who don't get to it on day one. But I just think I would personally classify this group as really just like below average. I think we've just gotten really spoiled by some of the classes we've seen recently and previous draft classes. And, we're going to go in depth quite a bit on the top guys, but just to add some necessary context when we're ranking these guys into where we're talking about grades. My wide receiver 8 this year is a very similar player with almost an identical grade as my wide receiver 14 last year. So it's just completely different classes in my opinion. But I wanted to get your thoughts on this as well.
So this class is a very interesting class in general because I look a lot at like the day one. Or the guys that are looked at the day one area. A lot of them are wide receiver 2 types, maybe high end wide receiver 2 types. There might be a couple that you kind of view as like a wide receiver 1. There's obviously a little bit of questions on whether the one of them is even going to play wide receiver. But then you get to the day 2 profiles, and this is where my frustration with this class really reaches a turning point.
Hmm.
You see a lot of bad scheme in terms of how these guys are being deployed. There's a lot of consistent like stop routes. It's just consistent mirrored concepts to the point where you're just not gaining anything new out of what you're watching. So it becomes extremely frustrating just watching them like kind of like run into a brick wall essentially. But
Hmm.
also you look at some of their profiles, there's a lot more like inconsistency. Like you can see like some of the upside with like how these guys tested, but you could see like the technical flaws with some of these guys that are a little bit more apparent. And then
Hmm.
where I think I differ on this class the most, I like some of the day 3 guys more because I think their risks are more appropriate for how they're currently slotted. Like for instance, I like Ricky White as a guy who may not
Yep.
have like the best hands technique consistently, but I think the fact that he's a special teams demon and I really like how he paces his routes and sets them up. I mean, like I think that's a player I feel more comfortable taking on day 3 because I feel like I get less risk and more
Yeah.
potential return on value, not just as a receiver, but in other roles as well, which I think if you look at the risk factor of the day 2, it's all over the place, and that's what's
For
really
sure.
scares me about this class.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I would say like I struggled to find guys that like I thought were going to go on day 3 that were going to be carving out pass on offense. Personally, Ricky White's a good shout just because like you mentioned the special teams value that he brings there. Like that's going to be huge. Like he's gonna have an NFL career just because of that. The dude blocked 4 punts last year. You mentioned like the and like some of the other guys, like I like Torrey Horton. I know like consensus has him, I think, in like the 4th or 5th round, but I actually think he goes day 2. So like that would be the other guy that I would kind of stamp. If we're talking about day 3 guys that could potentially land there. The other thing, like you mentioned, the scheme, it's a really good shout, especially like when you're watching these prospects. Jalen Royals is a good example, just with their scheme. Like he's literally lining up about like 5 feet from the sideline, just with how spread out everything is.
I hated watching that tape.
So it's difficult to get an evaluation on him of like how he does against press coverage, because there are times where he gets kind of bodied up to the white, but it's like, how can you really hold that up against him? He's starting on the sideline. So it
Exactly.
does. And then like you got like guys like Trey Harris, who like Trey Harris ran like 3 routes at Ole Miss. So and like we're talking about these guys as like day 2 wide receivers. So it is really complex. It's difficult. You're always looking for traits at this position. I know that like the fantasy spectrum and stuff is all in on like the production and different metrics, which I think like obviously Nick and I are both like in, alignment here. We're trying to combine like the film and the data to see like which prospects are going to translate the best. But I do want to kind of jump into, our rankings. This is somebody that, again, just for future context, like if you're new to the rankings or new to the podcast, Nick and I we've talked about these players over the course of the season, but we don't share like our rankings with one another just to give like you guys like an authentic, like kind of viewing experience. So we do differ on this next player we're going to talk about. My wide receiver 5 is Luther Burden from Missouri. I have a huge Luther Burden like monologue kind of in my notes that I will try to keep as brief as possible. But Burden, he is an underclassman. He's 6 foot, 206 pounds. Is going to be 21 years old for the majority of his rookie season. So he's one of the younger players at this position in this class. The production took a major step back this past season, less than 700 receiving yards, I believe. There's necessary context on why that was the case. I want to get into that. But let's just start with the positives that I kind of wrote down in his eval. Electrifying player with the ball in his hands. Thick lower half. He absorbs hits. He's got the contact balance to maintain his balance after the hit. Keep his feet, get upfield. Also has like the twitch to the stop and start ability to make guys look, quite frankly, silly in space. And I think he's got like running back instincts in terms of like maximizing every touch from a vision perspective. I've been historically like a hater of this type of player. Everybody probably remembers like some of the rants I had on Malachi Corley this past year. Luther Burden adds more value beyond like the design touches. And like these are not like, this is not the Deebo Samuel lazy comp. I do think that some of this stuff is well founded. What I think makes him different than previous copies of this kind of player, the ball skills, very, very good in my opinion. They didn't use him as much as they should have down the field, but he's got the acceleration to stack corners consistently, get on top of them. He tracks the ball really well over his shoulder on slot fades. Think about like shot concepts and stuff like that in the league that are really super prevalent, just running those slot fades from the number 2 spot. Burden excels at all that stuff. He won routinely on those plays. He had a one-handed grab over his shoulder against South Carolina with like less than 2 minutes left in the game to give them the lead in the fourth quarter. Think back to like 2023. You go back and watch that tape. Florida, he kind of runs this route in between the numbers. He gets tangled up a little bit by this second level defender. The quarterback throws it back shoulder to him. He just kind of snatches back and grabs one-handed. It's super sick catch. I thought the Mississippi State game this year, there was also a really sick adjustment down the field in the back of the end zone where he kind of waits to the very last minute to contort his body back to the ball. He's got a good ability to like get in and out of his breaks efficiently. The best routes I felt like from him in terms of like breaking point routes were really like outbreakers in the intermediate area. Like he can snap guys off and get out and explode out of his cuts. So you like that stuff about him as well. And then like the drop rate, like he's got a sub 5% drop rate over the past 2 years. So his hands are pretty reliable, even if he does occasionally let things into his body. On the flip side of like the negatives of his profile, and then I kind of want to get your thoughts on him as a player. I know you're quite a bit higher on him, but he wasn't exposed to press coverage as much. So you got the 85% reps in the slot. That's something to take note of. The reps I saw were good enough to where I think that the other skills, the quickness, the coordination is going to project him to like more of a flanker role. So I'm not like necessarily isolating him into just being a slot receiver. However, he's a complete negative in the run game. So that is kind of important for the modern NFL. The two concerning parts for me in terms of like his evaluation, the lack of effort, major red flag. I don't think I've ever seen a player more checked out at certain points of the game than Burden for whatever reason, especially if he doesn't think he's getting the ball. So a couple examples I'll talk about. prevalent concepts in the NFL. You think about the dagger concept. So if you're ever asking your slot receiver, we need you to run full speed, take the top off the defense, whether it's carry the mic up the field or just blow the safeties backwards so that we can run a dig route underneath you. Completely disinterested, does not care about it like whatsoever. So that was like a little bit of a thing for me. You often like see him in the same vicinity as other players all the time, especially against zone coverage, just because like he's just lollygagging off the ball. And it's just really tough. This past year against Florida, they tried to get him isolated on a safety one-on-one to take a shot down the field. He jogs off the ball, quits on the rep. The ball's like 25 yards overthrown. Probably wasn't going to be an accurate pass anyway. That's concerning to me. And then I just don't think he has like a great feel for like the position in general, like the timing of things, when the ball needs to come out. A good example of that was the LSU game. So it's late in the game, fourth quarter. It's like a gotta have it moment. And they have him at the foot of a stack. It's a 3x2 stack. And they basically bring him off, and his job is to run an option route. So the defender, he comes up, he gets hands on him. And then instead of like, breaking to the outside against man coverage or trying to cross his face, he just stops on the route. Like the defender just bottles them up, and the quarterback is clearly looking at him as the number one read in the progression. He's like, hey, I need you to get open. Well, he doesn't. He quits on the route, and then the quarterback gets blown away from behind, and he gets sacked. He fumbles the ball. Game's over. So there's a lot to like with Burton's game. It's just, to me, I have no idea what you're going to be getting at the next level. I think that the talent is absolutely tremendous. I just couldn't give him a first round grade because of that, because the lack of effort in general, like lack of feel for the position, is concerning. But I do understand why other people would be quite bullish on him, given the flashes of what you see on tape.
So I think you're very on point about the effort, especially in the run game. I think that is one of my major concerns. Is it constantly looks like he is just disinterested in making that block. Like he'll put his hands on him and he'll just kind of like stand there. He won't move the feet very often. And and that's usually like a pretty big red flag that like, oh yeah, he's not interested.
A lot of times you'll see him like turn his back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead,
exactly.
continue.
But I think one of the things where I differ from you, I think he actually has a tremendous feel for what he wants to do as a route runner. I think a lot of it has to do with how he is deployed. I think a lot of how he's being used as this guy who needs to be consistently schemed up. And I don't think that is actually as productive for what Luther Burden wants to be. So, for instance, I think one of the things that was extremely underutilized about Luther Burden was just utilizing his ability in terms of his late hands, his late separation skills along the boundary. And what I mean by that is like the outside, like, the back shoulder throws on like those curl routes and stuff like that. You can see that type of ability on those like fades where he sometimes gets it. A lot of times he gets put into like a fast motion, like a cheat motion and then he gets like that huge running start, and then the quarterback will put it on the back shoulder. I have seen reps. It's sprinkled on the tape through 2023 and 2024. I've seen him show abilities like where he knows how to pace his route and stem it to leverage defenders, because he's aware of like where the leverage is. He wants to have his own terms of how he gets to that route. And I think he shows really good packages of how to get there. I think the problem is he's just not able to showcase it a lot of the time. So you'll see him consistently just like running these like low effort hitch routes where he's just kind of like stopping immediately after the first go. And then he's trying to transition upfield. You see him a lot on those types of routes. And I think that's fine as a floor if you're trying to like, if you're like worried about like what Luther Burden is going to be at the next level, and you don't think like, oh, he has like the type of route running chops to be that type of guy, and you think he's more of a change of pace. Sure, that's a decent floor. But part of why I'm so high on him is I just see like the high like level stuff at the top of stems. I see him sizing guys up and consistently trying to deceive with his head fakes or his hip shifts. It's not very often, and you'll see it consistently. Like, sometimes like he has to create that late separation with his hands, like to push off and, get that type of play. But where I really think his understanding his feel for the game really shows is in the scramble drill. There is a play against Mississippi State. You mentioned it where like he makes a great adjustment. On that play, he stems his route. He sets up the slot guy, and he kind of needs to. This is where I think he needs to fix a little bit of like his route breaks. He needs to like have it sharper. He kind of rounds it off like to immediately, and like he's kind of like they got a little bit of tighter coverage, and then he kind of realizes, okay, wait, there's no space. There's so much space upfield because there's no safety. So he ends up like running all the way back there. He makes incredible adjustment, like on the, I believe it was the back shoulder or the front shoulder. I'm trying to.
It's
I'm
back
struggling.
shoulder. It's a
Yeah,
nasty catch. It's
yeah,
a nasty catch.
and the reason like he's able to make that play is because his hands are so late at that moment.
The
Like he's
defender
not
has no idea the ball's even in the air.
exactly. He's not tipping him off, and that's one of the things I find really impressive. And you mentioned the drop rate. He keeps his hands so consistently tight on overhand catches. He keeps them tight on underhand catches. He has consistent grip strength. You see it all throughout his tape. I'm just really like, I feel that there is more there than what we were being shown at Missouri. It felt like a teaser for what should have been like Luther Burden as a true wide receiver. So I'm just going to kind of like get this out of the way. I'm obviously higher on him. I actually have him as a wide receiver 2 in this class. And where I view him, I think of him not as a Deebo Samuel type. I think of him as like Sammy Watkins back at like Clemson. In terms of like, you could see like the yak ability, the ability to climb the ladder, the vertical, like he stacks guys like consistently down the field vertically, whether it's post routes, deep, those slot fades, those deep overs. I just think he's a guy who can stretch you vertically, but I also think he's just a guy who was completely underutilized in the intermediate.
Yeah.
Like he has like the short, like outbreaking routes that he'll run, and then he has like the hitches, but I don't think he was used on slants enough where he could utilize his pacing, his quickness off the line of scrimmage, where he can beat guys across his face. Because here's the thing about him. He has contact balance, not just through, after the catch, it's through the route stem. He doesn't get bothered as much by that contact. And I could see him being more of a threat in that area if he was just allowed to thrive in that area, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think, like you mentioned, like some of the route stuff, the route running is like inconsistent at best, not just because like of the effort itself, but just like there are reps where like he will snap guys off and you see the lower body flexibility. Like I think you tweeted out a rep earlier today, like before we jumped on here, about like him snapping that guy off from South Carolina. And like that was one of the ones, like you see like those like 10-yard outbreakers and like some of the sail routes that he runs and things like that are usually pluses. It's just, for me, it is kind of interesting because in a class where I really do feel confident, like I tweeted this out yesterday, the day before, I feel really confident about like my top 7 guys, like how I have them evaled, like their strengths and weaknesses, how I have them tiered in the class. Burden is the guy that I could see. I think I'm kind of just landing in the middle on, because I think that he has like really the widest range of any of these guys, definitely that we're going to talk about today in terms of like, I could see it being October next month and everybody's like, we let this dude fall out of the first round of the draft. Like, this dude is one of the best players on the field already as a rookie. And then I could also see a scenario where it's like the end of his rookie year and we're already hearing stuff about like he's, his work ethic, like the quarterback hates him. The comp that I have for him, you mentioned Sammy Watkins. I don't think he's Deebo. And like one of the things that I hate about the Deebo comparison is like, Deebo is such a special player that there are no good one-to-one comparisons for him. And I also think people don't understand how good Deebo was against zone coverage. I don't think that people understand how good he was as a blocker. And that type of style takes a toll on your body. That's the reason why Deebo slowed down even before he got to 30. So you have to be able to do more than that, in my opinion. I do think Burden has more potential as a separator, especially versus man coverage. I thought that you saw more effort from him when he thought that he was getting man coverage. In my opinion, on his film, the player that I kept coming back to is like a comp. I see DJ Moore, and unfortunately, I watch way too much Bears film just because like I am fascinated by Caleb Williams and if he's going to work out the NFL. So I watched every single game of their film. And DJ Moore is like one of those players that I think the fantasy community loves because he gets targeted a lot and some of the things he can do after the catch. He's really strong. can make some plays for you down the field as well. Struggles with DJ Moore, other than press coverage, is like he's not really all on the details sometimes, and he's quite checked out on a number of different occasions. So like that's the thing that popped up to me was like I got 4 or 5 games into his film this year, and I was like, this is DJ Moore. Like when he wants to play, he's obviously very good, and it just kind of concerns me as far as like where we get to the next level. So that's a really healthy like 15-minute Luther Burden conversation. But I do think that we even if we do see him a little bit differently, I feel like that'll give people some good context into the player. I think number 4 wide receiver for me is another slot receiver. It's Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, 6'1", 202 pounds. Just to me, this is like the latest and greatest rendition of like this power slot archetype that's become more popular over the past decade or so. The best way to simplify this, man, is like he's just a pro's pro. Like he's just such a smooth mover. He's not overly explosive, but like every step feels so intentional, calculated. He's so efficient with his movements. He's so smooth, man. If you watch him run these like deep sail routes, right? Like he understands tempo. He will stem things inside and then like wait till the very last possible minute to kind of swivel his hips and get back to the boundary. The ball comes there. He's getting like 2 feet inbounds like a pro every single time. There's enough gas of him like going up the field and stretching the field, like in between the safeties, like splitting safeties on shot plays like that. I don't necessarily think that the speed is going to necessarily be a strong point. We'll talk about that in a second. But I do think like the late hands, just understanding like how to track the football without giving away your intent prematurely. I think the term like quarterback friendly, I think the 2 terms that I hate most in the scouting world, quarterback friendly and a quarterback that can make all the throws. Those 2 things get so overused and under discussed in terms of what they actually mean and how they translate to the next level. But he is the epitome of that classification. I think the superpower for Egbuka is how he consistently shortens the throws. He never allows defenders to undercut him on his routes. Just has such a good feel for like working back to the football. I did a film room on Egbuka for the channel members. I think it was a month or 2 ago, and you guys can go back and watch it. I think I included like 6 or 7 different examples of him working these deep over routes and working back to the football. It's like truly next level stuff at the position. I think his feel for zone coverage is like next level. Yes. There's not like, I don't think he gets out of breaks super well working towards the ball, but he always comes back to the ball. So it kind of compensates for that a little bit. I think this class has a lot of bad blocking receivers, but if you want to see like what it should look like at the college level, go watch the Michigan State film. It is fantastic. They use him on every different assignment, slicing across the formation, inserting into the gap to take on a linebacker, fitting up a safety, whatever you want. Like he did that game
to the formation a couple times too. Like where
it was awesome. Yeah. It was so awesome. They sprung so many, like obviously we've already did the running back rankings. We talked about Travion Henderson and like his ability to like turn all these explosive plays, and like all of their big runs came really at the expense of him. I felt like he sprung so many explosive plays. Now in terms of like the negatives, I really do feel like the general population like has a good feel of like what Egbuka is as a player. I think he's just like kind of this jack of all trades, but maybe master of none player. There where it's worth talking about some of like the finer details of like what makes him so effective. But I do think from a physical standpoint, he doesn't have that singular trump card that really stands out, or especially among the guys that we're going to talk about today, like the best players at this position. He took a screen to the house against Marshall, but I don't necessarily think that he's an overly creative or explosive player after the catch. He's going to get what's blocked for him and not a ton more. I mentioned that he's more smooth than like snappy as a route runner. I'm not all that concerned about him, but I do think like as you get to the next level, you start to face the best top tier athletes. Those windows are going to be condensed a little bit more for you. I do think that, he's probably going to be a guy that's going to be primarily a slot, maybe some Z versatility, but that's going to be in offenses that are going to be using more condensed formations. Like if you're actually like trying to go out there and put him on the line of scrimmage, I would not recommend that. I just don't think that that's the home for him. The reason that I have him over Burden is quite simple, to be honest with you. I'm just willing to sacrifice some of the upside for a much clearer vision of how this player is going to look at in the pros.
Totally get that.
Because of how confident I am in like his transition to the NFL. I think he's going to impact winning from day one. And he's like a wide receiver 2 type that ideally you would want paired with I don't know why I've kind of settled in on this type of player. And maybe it's just because this player plays in Houston already, but I see Robert Woods, and I loved Robert Woods coming out of USC. I know everybody says I'm on Ross St. Brown, and maybe that's the top end comp if he gets in the right system. I'm not really sure, but I think my vision of him is can we just get him to Houston with some of these tighter splits and condensed formations with Nico Collins as your boundary alpha X wide receiver, with CJ Stroud. That's what I want, because and even if it means that's the perfect home for him and I end up lower than him on the rankings, that's what I want for him as a pro, because I think that his demeanor is I think he's going to be one of the fan favorite players in the NFL because he plays the game the right way.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Egbuka is one of the highest floor prospects in this entire class.
Where did you have him?
I have him at 5. I have him at 5, and I could have argued him at 4, and I'll get into what my number 4 brings to the table a little bit. But where I kind of look away from the upside of Egbuka is being able to sky above the rim and make those big contested catches and in those types of situations, because that's where I think that could make him more of an outside type of player at the next level, but he's not quite to that area. He's more of one of those guys who makes those tough over the middle, gets hit, holds on to the ball, knows how to settle into that zone coverage, will stem his route to be able to get to go under or over depending on, how the quarterback is looking at him. And I like that a lot about him. He's just a very safe player. And again, he's a field general. People don't put this a little bit into account, but Egbuka, one of the reasons he's such highly thought of is because he's so smart. He, pointed out the leverage against Notre Dame and how Will Howard should hit Jeremiah Smith on this play because of how the corner was playing, and he ends up making the throw that ends up sealing the game. And Egbuka, he's the one who pointed that out. He's going to be one of those guys that helps a young quarterback develop along the way, and that's why I think Egbuka is one of those guys that you can get so much value out of, even if you're only getting a floor of say a big slot or a top end wide receiver 3. I don't view him as the Amon Ra or the Puka Nacua type because I don't think he has the yak threat.
That's the difference I think people are missing, in my opinion, with the comp as well. So that's a good shout.
Puka was a tank after the catch. He actually was abrasive with his stiff arms and his ability to just initiate contact, that I don't think people understand just the type of prospect he was. It was just the fact that he had injury concerns galore with his profile. But Egbuka, just a very safe prospect. I genuinely don't have a ton of concerns with this game. I think he's I think he's about as sure of a fit in any offense as it gets, and the run blocking is going to be such a net positive towards the scheme of your run game.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing too. I think ideally, I didn't end up with a first round grade. I'm pretty stingy with my first round grades, just my grading scale in general. Last year, I think I had 24-ish first round grades. This year is going to be way less than that. So ideally, I think you would love to get Egbuka maybe early second round, something like that. He may get pushed into the first round this year. Not saying he's not a good player. It's just the class in general. It's not great because we're trying to make content at the end of the day on the draft cycle. So it's not great in our business to just come out and say hey, this draft class isn't very good. But this is a down year for the draft. It just is that's one of the things I strive to be. And we talk about this all the time. We want to be we want to be right, but we also want to be honest with people about the reality of these players. And I know a lot, it's more popular. It does better for views and content of you overhype and over pump everybody up on social media and on YouTube and everything like that. We're just not going to do that. That just is the reality of it. So I do think Egbuka ends up probably sliding into round 1. But he is a good player. You know exactly what you're getting at the next level. It's also cool that we've got some differences on how we view these players, just because in terms of ranking, because I think it makes for a good conversation on where these guys could end up landing. My number 3 player, probably like, I mean, one of the more fascinating watches of the cycle. Tetairoa McMillan, Arizona wide receiver, aka T-Mac. I'm not calling him T-Mac just as a lazy acronym. That's literally like what he wants to be called. Have you seen this?
I have not actually.
Okay, like he's literally asked people to call him T-Mac. Like that's what he wants to go by. So I'm going to
Hmm.
refer to him as T-Mac. It's just, I mean, it's a cool nickname. Like who
Yeah.
didn't love Tracy McGrady when they were kids? With him, I think like the spotlight's been on him for quite a while now. 6'4", 219 pounds. And my evaluations, like I'm always like focused on, the film, try to go back, find the data to confirm my suspicions. But it is worth pointing out that like I don't talk a lot about like box score production, but this dude has been the dude since he stepped foot on campus. Like as a freshman, 700 yards receiving, 1,300 yards back-to-back seasons. This dude has just been consistently productive. It's off the charts. His ability to separate late in the rep down the field, I think, is like pretty special stuff. When prepping for this podcast, I actually went back to my summer notes on him. And there are just like timestamps. I'll just like make little notes about like specific plays in my huddle that I need to go back and reference when I talk about these players. There's just timestamp after timestamp, him like just mossing guys over and over and over. He got Travis Hunter in the red zone on a fade with a one-handed grab. I mentioned this like one-handed grab because fade routes are typically not high percentage throws, but with McMillan, given his like body type and his frame and his catch radius, they are pretty good opportunities. I mentioned his hands just because like he has like 10-inch hands, and like you see the way he catches the ball.
It's
like
his grip strength. It's his grip strength.
It is unbelievable. It's almost like magnetic at times, the way like the ball just like sits in the pocket of his hands. And it was cool to see that at the combine, like when we got measurements for that, because that was one of the things that I noted. I was like, this dude's got to have like just monstrous hands. But in terms of like him, the focus, I think, with the ball in flight, the awareness of where the sideline is, top notch. He was a little banged up this past season, from my understanding, but I do think that like he did improve as a route runner, and that was something that I wanted to see. Like coming out of summer, I was like, this dude just doesn't separate enough, like to be a top tier wide receiver in the NFL. Like I just don't think the amount of contested catch opportunities he had was really due to like his lack of separation ability. I thought that he added deception this year. I thought that there was a better understanding of how to get open. I thought that decelerating, like on these like deep comebacks and stuff like that on the boundary, he does a really good job of like when he gets these bail technique corners that have their backs to the sideline, of understanding like, okay, if I can get into his blind spot and then sink my hips and drop to the sideline, as long as the ball is on time, that corner will not make the play unless he's like Deion Sanders level athletic. He just has a really good understanding of like how to be there on time and how to be deceptive. But what I think truly separates from him to this like specific archetype of players that we typically get, really tough to bring down after the catch. For its 29 missed tackles this season.
Only one who had more was Luther Bird with 30.
Yeah, I mean, like it is unbelievable. You just don't see guys do this that are this size. One of the things I think he does like really well that's like stands out to me, they run a lot of these like quick out patterns where it's like a speed out from like 5 yards. He'll do it, and it's not that he's getting so much separation because of how quick or explosive he is. Like he does it and then shaves his route back to the quarterback, and as he's doing it, he's like kind of contorting his body to get back up the field. And then the cornerback, it kind of, his angle of departure changes, so the corner is kind of left like arm tackling him, and like you just can't do it. Like he's just too dang big.
He's abrasive. He's abrasive after the catch.
There was some like stiff arm. Like I just thought like his physicality after the catch kind of it took a notch up this year, and I thought that was good. I actually thought that like his work in the middle of the field, dig routes, anything like in between the hashes. There were some times where they would ask him to go like sit over the ball and find voids in zone coverage. Excellent. He has a really long-standing relationship with Noah Fafita. I think they went to high school together, right?
Yes,
you probably know that. The scramble drill, like with them, was like automatic. Like Fafita made this one throw. I think this might have actually been 2023. He does like the pro day throw, which Fafita doesn't have the arm to do the pro day throw.
He doesn't.
Or make it look cool. But he does like the pro day throw where he rolls out to his left and like chucks the ball to McMillan. Well, McMillan starts the route in the middle of the field, and then he kind of does similar situation you were describing earlier. He sees like Fafita exited the pocket. He's like, I'm just going to go deep.
Exactly.
He's got this poor like 5'8" corner who's probably working at Target right now on his back, and he just goes up and like literally top extension and mosses the dude. So there's a lot to like with him. Now I think like minor concerns. is that he just does not have any type of burst off the ball. And like the top gear is really limited as well. So like I just don't think he's going to be able to consistently threaten guys with speed vertically. I think the dominance at the catch point is enough for me to think that he can overcome that if you've got a quarterback that's willing to put trust in him to win those like 50-50 balls. But there will be some like low percentage target throws. Like he'll probably be a player that like runs hot and cold just because that's kind of what this style of player typically does.
Yeah.
I think he lacks explosiveness out of his breaks and just does not separate at a super high level. I think it's adequate for the NFL level for him to play outside. We'll see. My biggest concern is like we've just seen like this style of receiver like fail over and over and over again. In order to really succeed, I think that you have to really weaponize like your size and your physicality, your strength. And I don't think that McMillan actually does that right now a little bit, other than the catch point and after the catch. I need him to do it in the route stem. I need you to bully people off the release. He is like way too comfortable allowing these little midget corners to just hang on his jersey all the time. And it's like, dude, I think it's great that you can go up over and sky over the top of these guys, but can you please use your hands to get them off of your jersey? And then like off the release too, like there's a lot of times where he's trying to do just like these like and one mixtape or sauced up releases. And it's like, dude, they're comparing you to T. Higgins. I need you to get up off the ball, shove a dude off of you and run inside and get your head back to the quarterback. Like, I just think that I think that the type of player he needs to be at the next level is a little bit different than the one that he has in his mind right now. And I kind of need him that could just be beat out of him at the next level. Cause I think he may just go up against like Patrick Surtain and it's like, oh, this dude's just as strong and he's way more athletic than me. I probably need to understand like how to do things a little bit differently. So
yeah,
those are like the major concerns that I have. I just want to see like him use his physicality more. Another example is like he's not going to run by people. So like when corners are sitting off coverage against him, yeah, you can throw him underneath routes and like force those guys to tackle, which is good. But those guys are also going to be like squatting on routes. So like
exactly.
you'll see guys like kind of cheat up a little bit on his breaks, which like this like separation stuff kind of comes up a little bit. But it's like if he would understand, like at the break point when I'm running a 10-yard, say I'm running a 10-yard curl and I got to get to the sticks. When you get to the sticks, it's like kind of like we talk about tight ends. Use your body to create space. Run into this dude, get him on his heels and floating backwards, work back to the quarterback. He does a great job against zone coverage, like consistently working back to the ball. I love that about it. It's just like, dude, I need you to understand that you are 6'4", 220. And I don't think that there's always that understanding that you see on film. He is like a poor blocker. I think like if he doesn't separate well enough on the outside, you could move him into the power slot archetype of player because like he can do that stuff. He's great in the middle of the field, like I said.
Yeah.
So like that does add some floor, but like in order to do that, like we kind of need this dude to block a little bit. And he just wasn't asked to do that. And when he just was totally disinterested.
Yeah, I can agree with a couple points that you definitely brought up. I definitely think I'm a little higher on his physicality throughout the route stem, mainly at
Yeah.
the top, because I noticed like he was consistently like fighting guys' elbows, like trying to create that late separation. But you mentioned like the and one mixtape stuff. He has tried to do way too much with pacing, with slow pacing off.
It's like, dude, you are slow. You are slow. It doesn't matter. Like, and like people, this is another like one of my pet peeves, right? Like his pro day, like 40 numbers come out. And it's like, regardless of which side of the argument you're on, people are like over here like parading in victory lap, like, oh, like I told you it was gonna be this. I told you it was gonna be this. It's like, dude, who cares? Like, we all had the same film. Like, we can see, like, he doesn't run by people on film. He's not gonna run by people at the next level. It just is what it is. Now, you can still be an effective player aside from that, but we don't need to like make this a controversial thing. The film is the film. But go ahead, continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah. One of the things where I think I differ on the vertical aspect of his game, I don't think he sells the vertical aspect of his game enough. This is where I think, like, because you mentioned the Anlin mixtape stuff. He's sometimes like why he ends up like struggling is because he's trying to slow pace, like he's trying to slow his tempo throughout the route, and I think to a degree it works a little bit like on like those in break, like those quick in breakers like slants, but when you're not selling enough of the vertical threat, they're like, okay, I'm just going to cut off this inside path and you're going to get bodied on the slant. Like I've seen it happen multiple times. I think what he needs to do, he needs to incorporate better body language into his vertical stems. He doesn't put pads over knees consistently enough. He's not like selling with like these elongated strides. He's not pushing vertically enough. Is how I
And that's
feel.
a good point because that's going to matter at the next level.
Exactly. And I think that's why he's not selling that element of his game
Hmm.
enough. And I think it can become a threat, especially as a two-way type of vertical threat. Not necessarily separation, but like being able to win above the rim, back shoulders. I think that element can definitely come into play, but he needs
Hmm.
to sell that aspect better so the rest of his game can kind of like come together. I
Yeah.
think one thing that was actually a slight concern for me, I liked his technique, his hands catching technique more in the 2023 film than I did in 2024. I felt like he was kind of clapping on like those stop routes a little too
Hmm.
often. And I don't know if it's because he's thinking about his technique on how to and like, making sure that like he snaps his break off consistently, but his hands would start wide and then he would kind of bring them together and it led to those types of drops that like you don't want to see at the next level. I
Hmm.
think it is something he can fix with his game. I think it's something that he's shown that it wasn't like a problem the year before. So I think it's something that he can like, fix, but
Yeah.
it's something that I definitely felt like worth noting. I definitely feel that like because we have him in the same spot, wide receiver three, but we kind of view him a little differently in terms of the vertical like aspect because
Yeah.
I don't think like he's necessarily fast. I just think he needs to sell something to convince guys that like and it would open up the rest of his game.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see that too. And I don't necessarily think that McMillan. I was kind of joking or exaggerating when I said he was slow. I don't really think he's like slow. I just don't think that
I kind of know
he's.
what you were saying. Like you were saying like like he can be fine in that element. Like he
Yeah,
can
I just think it's like it's like below average. Like I really think that the film shows like a high 4.5s type of player, which I think that you can win with that as long as the other stuff is good enough. I think the biggest thing for me is like it was the stuff on press coverage. Like you just have to be in order to win like this at the NFL. And if you're not going to create a ton of separation, like you have to be a bully. And like there was one game in specific, I can't remember the opponent, and because I don't think the team was very good. But there was a game where he's out wide at the X receiver spot, and he's getting pressed up by a really small corner, and the corner just throws him down on the ground on third down, like throws him down on the ground and out of bounds. And it's like, you're 6'4", 220. Like that cannot happen. It just can't happen. So that stuff is a bigger deal for him because like he's going to need to not just be like adequate. He's going to need to dominate in that way because of like some of the other deficiencies, just with the way that he moves and like how big he is. But I do think that the back shoulder stuff, like it's going to be automatic. Like I really do think that he just has such a good feel for how to play those things out, read leverage, the focus in the air is just, it really is top notch. So do you want to talk about? So we have the same last two players. This next player, I'm a little bit higher on than you are. You want to talk about him, or you want me to go first?
I could talk about him a little
Okay,
bit
yeah, go
because
ahead.
I
Because I
I
went
all right.
first in the last couple.
So number 4 for me. So if we're keeping track of this, I had Abuka at 5. I have Tet McMillan at 3. And then Luther Burden's my number 2. So number 4 for me is Matthew Golden out of Texas. Golden to me, this is one of the most interesting parts about his game. He just kept getting better every single game. Like
Yep.
he dominated down the stretch, and I think a lot of that had to do with his superpower, which is ball tracking and winning above the rim. Something that you don't expect a 5'11", like 195-pound receiver to do consistently, but the way he does it, keeps his hands tight. He shows that ability to contort his body in the air. He attacks at its earliest point, and that's why I think he's so good in that area. That's why I think it's his superpower. What's really funny, go to I was trying my best to look for like, like elements of his speed in the Houston tape, and I went back and I was shocked at how bad he was at tracking the football at Houston and like how often he was not finishing at the catch point. I was like, how did he make this big of a jump in 1 year? Like, how did this like? And I think that's a testament to his work ethic, and that's where I'm really betting on him. You know,
Mm-hmm.
everyone, Isaiah Bond, Jaden Blue, they were all talking about how they were going to beat the combine record. And not only were they not the fastest at Texas at the combine, it was Matthew Golden who didn't say a single word about what he was going to do. He just kind of put up and just he kind of just put up and shut up in terms of what he could do. I don't necessarily think it translates to the film, but I also think he's a guy who works extremely hard and is getting better at his craft. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe this is something that becomes more into his element. For instance, I thought he was struggling a little bit in the early part of the season with dealing with the contact, at the beginning of the route phase, but he started to show better understanding of how to avoid that contact, and I could see him utilize a blade release or diamond off the line of scrimmage. There's a really good route against Oklahoma and the red zone. He's one of those guys who's surprisingly good in the red zone because of the body
Awesome.
contortion. And,
Awesome.
and then where the red zone's one of my favorites because that's where he kind of just gets to show off his and one mixtape, type of stuff, because he's able to sell that inside vertical threat and then he ends up breaking outside. The quarterback's late, but it doesn't matter because he's making that, he's making the catch behind him, contorting
Yeah.
his body, getting both feet in bounds. And I think that's one of the great things about Matthew Golden is I think he's developing at a rapid pace. And I think he's a guy who's ascending as a player. And I think if you look at his body of work, I'm not necessarily enthused by all of his yards after the catch thing. He seemed very ordinary to me in that
Mm-hmm.
regard. I didn't think he was a guy who was extraordinarily strong in that area. I don't think he was necessarily crafty, but I don't want to discount the fact that he's developing in aspects of his game where he's showing that ability. And I think the fact he's really twitchy off the top of his route stems, I really like him on deep digs, those outbreaking routes, and also post rate those deep posts, because he's really able to showcase his speed, but not just that, his ball tracking. Because often the quarterback was so I don't even want to rant about Quinn Ewers. I'm not going to let that happen. But
we could derail the podcast real quick.
yeah. We're not going to do that. But it would be on the wrong shoulder or it'd be late, and he would still make the catch because he's able to track the ball in. And I don't think his ability to just be able to run in stride was utilized enough because of
Mm-hmm.
that mediocre ball placement. So for me, I like Matthew Golden. I think there are elements to his game that are still developing, but there's a ceiling and a floor that I feel comfortable about that has me excited about him as a Z receiver in the league, potentially with some ability to win off press coverage a little bit down the road. I think his body type is still developing in that regard. So I'm pretty bullish on him. I like him. I think, and he's my number 4 wide receiver in this class. I'm really interested to see why you have him at 2, though.
Yeah, I do have him at 2. I do have, this is more of a late first type of grade for me, but I've talked about Golden, I feel quite a bit, on social media. I've done a film room on Golden here, back in January. So I think a lot of people probably already know, the spark notes, I guess you could say, the cliff notes of what I feel about him as a player. But underclassman, transferred from Houston to Texas, really started skyrocketing up people's boards. I feel a lot of that was due to the stretch run. We saw the SEC championship game against Georgia. He went off in that game. We saw the playoff game against Arizona State, went off in that one as well in the college football playoff. But at the end of my film breakdown that I did on him, I think it was in January, I kind of said that the more that I watched, the more I felt this may end up being the best receiver in this class, when it's all said and done, once we get to the league. And I think that it's pretty easy to see why. I think that this is a player without a lot of weaknesses, in my opinion. He played the X, he played Z, they moved him into the slot. Whenever he was on the ball, I thought that his release package really stood out. He did understand how to get guys hips turned one way, kind of cross their face. I thought he was just really difficult to get your hands on. So he was really good at reducing his service area, the quick feet. Really showed up in that regard as well. He's a masterful route runner, in my opinion. He understands the nuances of how to get open. I just felt in all the games that I watched, was probably at least a half dozen, most of which came in the second half of the season, he was just open all the time. He snaps guys off at the break point like really effortlessly, where some guys kind of lose momentum or their momentum stalls after changing direction. Everything with him is like super, super sharp, and he kind of maintains his speed. I think that you go back and look at some specific plays like 4th and 13, the Peach Bowl, game's on the line, they need a score. He hits this cornerback with a nasty jab at the outside at the top of the route, breaks him off back inside to the post. He's one of the true like best like post runners that I've seen in several years. I don't think he plays quite to like the 4.29 like you said that he tested at, but he can absolutely take the top off the defenses. Like he comes off the ball with tremendous intense urgency. Like you watch this dude come off the ball, it is really, really impressive. Like the consistency that he gives a ton of effort in. He plays bigger than his size indicates, like you talked about, especially at the catch point. I think he's a really good leaper. I wanted to see like what his vertical jump would be. He's a guy who maximizes the wingspan that he was given. He can pluck balls out of the air. I do think that there is some untapped potential as a ball carrier. Not that he's going to be this like maybe like make you miss guy or run through tackles guy, but one play that really stood out to me was last year in the Texas A&M game. He gets off coverage and like he's a snappy guy. So like he gets up to the top of the route, he's running a curl. He kind of snaps down efficiently, comes back to the ball. The ball is actually there on time. He catches the ball and the immediate transition up the field. I mean, he erases these two tackling angles and gets like 20 yards after the catch. And that kind of stuff like makes you go like, oh, like maybe this could be more than maybe what the yards after catch figures look like if you just look at the box score.
I also had one play that came to mind, and it was a kickoff return against TCU with Houston. And he runs like right into a huge pile. He's able to stay upright, and then he ends up like taking the outside angle, and he just kind of like he just starts pulling away from guys. He ends up running it all the way to the house. I thought it was like the best showcase of like what his potential speed could look like and what his potential like ability after the catch could become in time. So that's why I don't like to discount like development. I think this is a guy who works really hard at his craft, and I think when I see plays like that, I have to take note of that. That's why I really like want to note that with Matthew Golden is I think he's an ascending prospect.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a good shout. I have this same exact word kind of in my one-liner at the very end of my notes, actually. But like I said, he's a well-rounded player. Like I just don't see significant limitations from him in any form, like on the film, from a traits perspective. I mentioned that he's difficult to get his hands on versus press coverage, but I do think there were a handful of reps, some of which came at the beginning of the season, which you were referencing, where I felt like when guys were able to contact him early in the route, they were able to kind of disrupt the timing, kind of stall him out a little bit. I think that's where you do see a little bit of like the frame show up at times. He's only like 191 pounds. So that's notable. It's like 26th percentile, but his drop rate decreased in 2024. I actually too went back and watched I watched like 2 games of his Houston tape. And then I just went back to watch highlights because I was like, how does this player like not break out? Like what happened? I know they had some other guys at Houston, Brown that transferred to Miami. They had some other guys there in that room, but I just wanted to see, and like the drops were a little bit of a concern. You look at the figures and like, just like there are some like focused concentration type drops underneath that make you like kind of like wonder a little bit about. I also just think like he just got a lot better. Like, I mean, it just is what it is. Like you can say it's a small sample size, which I completely understand if like that's your stance on him as a prospect. But I just think like the player that he was this year is not the player that he was last year. And I just think that that's just the natural. We often say development's not linear, but like guys like this, sometimes they just get a lot better. And like the rapid ascension just happens. And I think that that's really what happened at Texas. There were also some minor like injury stuff, I think, at Houston that kind of slowed him down a little bit. And like, I'm not a production snob. I understand that like there are people out there that look at the data and like that's just how they evaluate draft prospects. Totally get it. Like your process is your process. Terry McLaurin was a guy that like I loved heading into the Senior Bowl. Like the year he was coming out, was pretty obsessed with him, was higher on him than consensus. He ended up like, even though he was not so Golden, he's never been the primary vessel of an offense. He did kind of morph into that later down the stretch for Texas, especially after like week 6 or 7.
Yeah.
But Terry McLaurin, like he barely saw the field at Ohio State. I mean, there's guys out of the league right now that were playing above him, but you look at the traits and you
Paris
look at the
Campbell.
film, and it's the same. Like, he's unbelievable. So that's just kind of like my thing, is like why I don't take that part of it as much as some other people. But I think it's fine to note that he wasn't ever like maybe like the number one guy on a scouting report that you were game planning against, like maybe McMillan was at Arizona. But I'm taking this dude every day in round one. Like, I just think separation. You hear me talk about it all the time. Separation's king in the NFL. It's really difficult to get open. Golden gets open all the time, and I just think that this is an ascending player, like, worth betting on.
Great.
So,
And I think the ball tracking is his superpower.
yeah, and I think there is like a little bit of like miscommunication on like the type of player that he is, because I have seen some other people that like bring up like his size, like is he going to be able to play on the outside? For one, you gotta go watch some of the. I don't think the NFL wants this dude in the slot on third down.
No.
That's all I'm gonna say. When they tried to do that stuff against Georgia, he was making them boys look absolutely silly. So that's the other thing I think you're going to see at the next level. Teams are going to like move him around a little bit like Lad McConkey was for the Chargers this past year. But like some of that kind of stuff where, yeah, I mean, I think I don't necessarily have like a 1-to-1 type of comp for him, but I do think that if you look at like the measurables, and I already mentioned like the deep post stuff, and some of this is like me seeing the deep post stuff a lot as a kid, but there is like some Santonio Holmes stuff there, I think, in terms of like the player that Golden could potentially become, a guy who can play outside, but he can also play inside. He can win at all three levels, a good separator, and an explosive play generator. So I think that there's a lot to like with that kind of stuff. So you wanna gush about our number one prospect first, or you want me to go first? I have a laundry list of strengths for our number one player.
I think I'll take over from here.
Okay.
I think you got a long-winded talk about Matthew Golden. So there usually is not really a generational prospect in most classes, and it's funny because we look at this draft class as a whole, and it's like it doesn't seem that great at the top, and then
Mm-hmm.
I just look at Travis Hunter and the fact that he is wide receiver 1 and cornerback 1 at the same time. It's absolutely like insane. I'm not going to get into the cornerback tape. We'll get into that one other day. But his
Yeah.
wide receiver tape is special because he understands what corners are looking for and how to deceive them off the line of scrimmage. He is great with varying his pace. He knows how to sell vertically with his body language. Like when I mentioned with Ted McMillan about like, pads over knees, he's consistently being able to sell that in terms of things that he can do. He can cut off those like sharp breaking digs. He can avoid press coverage. There, his ability at the catch point, his ability to contort, how tight his hands are. One of my favorite plays is against North Dakota State, where Shador Sanders, he ends up leaving the ball a little bit too far inside on like I believe it was a red zone fade or it was an out, and he just he just leaps over him and goes inside of like of like the cornerback's like inside shoulder, and I'm just like, are you kidding me right now? With that, like he just mosses him to put into like into the words, like he just does that, and you see instances of him just bailing out like ball placement that isn't so great in terms
Yep.
of him just leaping above like the catch point. Like there's a play on a deep corner route where Shador ends up like having to throw it a little bit late. It's a tough throw, and I'm not gonna rag on him too much for this, but it's a big boy window, and he's like relying on Travis Hunter to like go over the underneath defender, like the hook, the curl flat defender, and then there's like that safety over the top. He goes over basically one of them, and he's got one on his back, and he's making that play. And I'm just like, are you kidding me right now? Like
Yeah.
Travis Hunter, his ability at every like turn, even like as a yards after the catch threat, he is not that big of a player, but he plays so dang strong in terms of how he wins after the catch. But he's also so great at deception. One of the things I love about him on those curl routes, he will as soon as he catches it, he's selling that dead leg instantly, and then he's like turning upfield like instantly. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's being able to make those types of plays, that quick transition after the catch. Travis Hunter is a special prospect. He's a special wide receiver prospect, and he's a special cornerback prospect. And just the fact that I have to talk about him as a wide receiver is just such a awesome treat, because I really was so skeptical about, like, oh, is this guy really a wide receiver at the next level? And then the
Mm-hmm.
tape this year just absolutely won me over in that regard. I don't care what position he plays. I think he can be special at both of them. And if he decides to play both of them, that's even better, because we need more unicorns in the NFL. It makes it fun.
Yeah.
You know, like how Shohei Ohtani in baseball is, he's one of the best pitchers. He's an incredible hitter. Well, Travis Hunter, be the next Ohtani for the NFL. Be that guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like we don't compare notes, but I feel like our notes are basically identical, just on like what we have. But I mean, we didn't get testing numbers on Hunter just because, quite frankly, like we just don't need them. Like, what's the point? This is certainly not a hot take, but by any stretch of the imagination. But I think that he is so clearly the best player in this draft that it's not even funny. Like, if you know me, you know that I'm very careful about certain adjectives to describe certain players, just because I feel like there's a responsibility for us as evaluators to give a accurate depiction of the player that we're scouting. That being said, like, I completely agree with you. Like, he's every bit of a generational prospect. We don't see guys like this. I think he has all pro potential at wide receiver at the next level, if that's the route that he chooses to go. Just a phenomenal athlete every sense. I think the ball skills are exceptional. I mean, he's so gifted at winning above the rim through contact, guys draped all over him. The Utah game is the one. I actually have that play in my notes timestamped. The Utah game is the one that you're talking about, I think, where they're running the smash concept and he's got the corner and it's cover two. The ball floats and hangs in the air, and he basically goes up, and the two defenders, the safety and the squatting corner in cover two, they converge on him at the same time, but he's leaping like Michael Jordan, like 6 inches above everyone else, and they both collide against him, and he helicopters on his way to the ground and holds on to the ball. I mean, it's unbelievable type of stuff. The yards after catch stuff reminds me a little bit of like Garrett Wilson, like just in the way that they move. You mentioned some of the examples
He's
of
violent.
like you mentioned some of like the cuts. They're so violent and so explosive. You mentioned like the instincts of like when you run those curls, and they ran like a ton of freaking curls in that offense. It's unbelievable. But like he would have this understanding of like where guys are behind him. It's like he had a sixth sense of like when he needed to spin left, when he needed to spin right. And like there's a play specifically that I wanted to talk about like in my notes. I think it's against Cincinnati, so you can just go look it up if you want on YouTube. But he's like running a curl against Cincinnati, and he comes back to the ball. And while the ball is like in midair, he comes back to it, and he's almost like positioning his feet to spin around and get up the sideline. And when he turns around, the cornerback can like barely get a hand on him, and you just see this like special. I mean, it's like a blur. The acceleration that he has up the sideline. It's like, oh my God. When you watch the dude on film on the All-22, he's so much more talented and just a different type of athlete. Like, I think if you do this long enough, or if you've even you don't have to be like in the draft evaluation space or anything like that. If you just watch ball long enough, when guys are different, when they just move differently, when they are a different type of talent. That's what we're talking about here. The other thing for me is just like with the receiver stuff that I think is just so unbelievable is he's so natural at everything he does. It's like it's stuff that you can't coach that he already does at such a high level. There's a play, and I think you really have to have the All-22 copy for this one to really get a sense of what I'm talking about, but I'll try to describe it. There's a play against Baylor. They're running cover two. He's running like in the slot, which he played a lot in the slot in 2023. Didn't do that this past year. He's running like up the pipe, like a bender route. Sanders puts a lot of air on the ball, like throws it like almost like a deep ball instead of like an intermediate throw. Hunter like realizes that the ball is like a little bit out of his grasp and like underthrown. He looks back for the ball, sees it's thrown, sees that it's going to be further than he anticipated, looks down and starts to like throttle and gear up, like up to his third gear, and gets like 10 yards of separation, and then looks back up to track the football. It's like, I don't know that I've ever seen somebody willingly take their eyes off the ball to sprint faster and then like get his eyes back up to the ball. It's just incredible the stuff he does. Like even like the hands, automatic. Like his drop rate, 2.3%, 63% contested catch winner. The ball just never hits the ground. Like every
They
time they
say
threw the ball
corners
to him.
can't catch. Well, Travis Hunter can
Yeah, this
catch.
this dude can. Like it's unbelievable. It's like a vacuum. I don't even understand. So in terms of like negatives, there really aren't a ton. I think that they're so easily explainable. Just like there were a couple plays where I thought that like his slender frame kind of allowed him to get ragdolled a little bit against press coverage. So that's something like if he wanted to play receiver full time, particularly like X, like he would probably have to get a little bit stronger. I think that would be helpful for him. I'm sure you've already probably seen some stuff on Twitter circulating around. Like sometimes he like rounds off his routes and maybe he isn't as like sharp as he could. One, they had him running a joke of a route tree at Colorado. That's not a real offense for one. And for two, just like knowing like how insanely competitive and hardworking and just naturally talented this dude is, I think that that's just stuff that could be cleaned up in a single training camp. Like I really do. I think that if you put him in a receiver room with, I'm just using this as an example, like, hey, go work with Devontae Adams for 6 weeks. I think you would come out and he would just be instantly like one of the best route runners in the NFL. I just think he's that naturally talented. I think he just gets it. Like you mentioned some of the stuff about like how he knows what to expect from corners and like what gives them issues, like how he needs to get open, all of those things. I think he's he's so freaking smart. Like he understands like how to get open, where the voids are going to be in the coverages, everything like that. It's really special stuff to where, and this is like, he's playing over 100 snaps every game. It's unbelievable. Like the amount of conditioning, like high level conditioning you have to give all of that effort on a play to play basis. It's exceptional. I just think I wanted to get your take because I do have an opinion on this. Do you think he should play corner? Like if it was you, like if you had the number one pick in the draft, I think we're both in the consensus here. Number one pick in the draft, I would take Travis Hunter over Cam Ward, even if I needed a quarterback. It's just my opinion. Would you play him at corner or would you play him at receiver? We don't have to get into the full cornerback eval, but where would you play him?
So I think he might be more special at corner just in terms of like his long-term play. But if my team needed a wide receiver and I have like so many questions about this wide receiver class as a whole, I'm taking him. I'm playing him at wide receiver and I don't care. I might even try and play him at both positions at that point. I want to see if it can work early. And if it doesn't, all right, well, cool. I can like specialize him at like the role I want him to be in. And I think the fact that you have those options makes it so enticing to take a player like that. I really do think he's the best player in this class. I don't even think it's close.
Yeah, so I went back and forth on this. Like me and you were like talking about this in our DMs, I think like last summer when we were talking about Hunter, just like as a receiver, as a corner.
Yeah.
So for me, not to give away like my full eval on him, because I know we're going to talk about corners probably eventually, but I just think the best thing about him at corner is the ball skills and like just the elite like spatial awareness that he has. But those skills are also like very prevalent like when he's on the other side of the ball. And I just kind of look at it like they're both premium positions, but I just think I was kind of like trying to get a firm take on like what I would do if I was in this position. I think I would play him at receiver. I say this as a DB guy. Like I would love to have a unicorn like this because I think like he's special in some regards. But I would think I would rather just have him on offense to where I could kind of control the way that he gets his volume. Like he could be a special part of my game plan. Like we could develop our entire offense around like his skill set. Whereas like at corner, it's a more volatile position. Like teams could strictly like, if you were just afraid of him, like you could just avoid him for the entire game. And like, not saying like that, there's still value in like, if he could develop into the man coverage stuff, which I have some little bit of reservations, maybe more than most. If he's going to be like special, like one-on-one man coverage corner, that's good if he could take away half the field, but it's like you can reduce like his ball production impact. Whereas at receiver, like we can funnel this dude targets anyway. Like he can win at all three levels. He can go over the middle. He can make great plays after the catch. I think I would just rather bet on like what's in my control and kind of take some of that back into my own hands instead of allowing like opposing offenses to kind of control how much impact he has on the game. If that kind of makes sense. I know it probably doesn't for some people. And I just think the skills, I do think he's a natural athlete that could probably get it at either one. And I think the most probably likely outcome is that he's a corner who maybe has some package plays at the NFL level. He's too special with the ball in his hands to not have like 12 to 20 plays every single game where like maybe you don't throw it to him on all those, but he needs to be on the field. Like you just have to find a way to getting the ball. I think that's going to happen in my opinion. He can't like his body would not hold up playing like both sides of the ball without all the amount of like the timing aspect on offense and the game planning, not being able to be in both meetings at once, like the intense, like this, it's a completely different level. But like, I just think that I would personally rather just try him out at receiver. And I just think that all of the minor concerns that I have, I think they would be cleaned up by the time he hit the field as a rookie. And I think he would end up being like having one of the more exceptional players at the position from really day one. So I'm pretty bullish on him. He's my number one player. And I think you and I really see him pretty similarly.
Yep. Yeah, we do. I mean, just special player with the ball in his hands. And you mentioned like if you wanted to control the outcome of how often he gets to touch the ball, just put him on the offensive side of the ball. So I definitely get it. I totally see the vision for both
And there's
sides.
a little bit of a floor there too. I think you mentioned this, but like there is like a little bit of a floor there to where like I mean, again, the term like generational and like can't like often kind of is synonymous with like can't miss. There's no such thing as a can't miss prospect. We've seen guys that like we've been like, there's no way this dude's not an absolute stud. That doesn't actually exist, especially like as it pertains to like injuries. You just don't know like how that stuff's going to play out the next level. I mean, I would just be flabbergasted if it didn't work out for this kid. Like either way, I would be stunned if it didn't work out for him at corner. I'd be even more stunned if it didn't work out for him at receiver. But if it doesn't, you can always just try him at the other position. So like, say he comes out and like he's just like, say he comes out and like he's just a wide receiver 3 his rookie season, and like, you know, you're just like, hey man, like I think we could get more out of him on the other side of the ball. Just move it. Like he can do it. Like he's done it his whole life. Like he's that special of a player. You could just move him. So, and I don't think it would really stunt his development as much as maybe some other players. I'm not huge on moving players positionally in their rookie contract. I just think like the adjustment to the NFL is so difficult, but like this is a player that we've never seen before. So I'm more willing to like be open to that as an outcome. So that was a lot. I think we did a good job, like, you know, encapsulating this the top of this receiver class as we could. I appreciate you joining me, man. It was a blast talking about these guys with you. As for everybody else, I've got a lot of content hopefully coming this week. I'm going to be finally dropping my DK Metcalf film room. I was hoping to do that today, but my power went out earlier and it kind of set me back a little bit. But hopefully within the next like 24 hours, like I said, my receiver rankings will be SteelersNow.com here in the next like 24, 48 hours as well. If you're not already following Nick on social media and stuff, read all the stuff that he's got cooking up on these prospects, you're missing out. So make sure to do that on your way out. Like, subscribe. Let us know what you thought of the video in the comments, and we will talk to you guys next week. Peace and love.